What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I made a new splitter out of G10 for my Arrma Felony and how you can use a piece of wood to make a template for many more. Stick around and you'll find out how. Welcome back, everybody. Like I said in the intro, today we are going to be making a new splitter out of this piece of G10 that I got. Very nice piece here. This is 2mm thick or just over, and we are going to replace the splitter here. This is a little flimsy. I also want to make this stick out a little bit further forward to protect the body a little bit better in the case of a crash or bump into a curb or anything like that. And I think it might look a little cooler. So let's get into it. First thing I'm going to do is remove the stock splitter. So what I am going to do is tape this to a piece of plywood. Beautiful Baltic birch. Can't believe I'm going to use this piece of wood. It's probably cost about $5 now. So I'm going to line up the edges. I'm going to tape this on. I'm going to cut out roughly, and then I'm going to use a flush trim router bit to go around and get the piece of wood exactly the same size as this. However, since I said I do want this to be a little longer, I'm going to offset this from the edge of the piece of wood slightly when I cut the front contour, and then I will retape it back when I drill the holes. That way it'll be a little bit longer front to back. So let's get started. So I am going to cut a piece of wood 4 inches, which is just longer than the length of the splitter front to back, and we'll go from there. So now that I know that this is roughly the same size as this, I am going to tape this piece on, just offset from the edge with a mount. So I am going to clean this piece off with some denatured alcohol just to make sure I get good adhesion from the tape. Give the wood a little wipe down as well. See how much dust? Doesn't look like it, doesn't feel like it, but it's there. All right, we will apply some tape. This stuff is very strong, so you need less than you think, but I'd rather have too much than not enough and have it move. So just to ensure that this is lined up with the back edge and the side edge, I'm going to use this, put some back pressure on it. Push down, come over to this side, put some back pressure on it, push down, put a weight on it for a few minutes, make sure that tape is adhered well, and then we will roughly cut it out. Now that I have the splitter adhered well to the piece of wood, I am going to cut this part off. Just to make it easier when we go hit it with the router, I'm going to line that up so I take off just less than what is left over. I am going to use the miter saw to cut off these parts. Looks to be about a 15-degree angle. Hit the dust collector. So now we have the piece roughly cut out to the same size as far as the front. And we do still have it offset from the back because I do want it to stick out a little bit. I believe this is 1/8 inch plywood that we use for a spacer, so it's going to stick out about 3 millimeters further forward from this than the stock splitter did. I am going to clean this up with the bandsaw just because it will be easier to get in there. And again, I'm not worried about getting too close to this back edge since I'm going to use a router. And I did want to leave a little bit of space because this piece will get shifted back a little bit. So I cut it a little close right there, but we should be okay. Moving over to the router table, I have a flush trim router bit. It's a 1/2 inch right here. I'm going to line the bearing up with the top of the splitter so I can go around and cut this off. If I do have a little bit left over, which it looks like I will flip the piece of wood around and then flush trim what's still there sticking out. And again, if you do not have a router table, you can use a hand router. You can do it by hand. You can sand it. You can cut it pretty close with a saw and then sand it if you really need to. While we're here, if you do like this router table, I will put a link in the description. This is a Rockler router table. I did make this cabinet from scratch and filled in the bottom of the base here. Got router bit storage. Routers in here, along with dust collection, a bunch of other tools in here. A lot of work, but it was a lot of fun and it really works well. So I have the first part of that routed flush. What I'm going to do now is pull this piece off, move it back so it's flush with the back. Then I will route the back, drill the 5 holes that we need, and then I'll go around the flush trim bit again with just a piece of wood. And so I got the splitter off the piece of wood. I am using a chisel to get the tape off. That has been what I have found to work best when you're using this type of tape, as you can see. And I'm not going to drill the holes until I have it set at the back of the piece of wood as the guide, because I want the front to stick out more. So now that I have those pieces on, we're going to line this up. This was sticking out just a hair. And I did route a little bit of this edge so I know that I want it to be flush. So I will grab a square, just so I know that's flush. You can also clamp it if you want. I prefer just to put a weight on it for a few minutes. Make sure everything is stuck. Now that this piece is stuck on there flush with the back of it, I am going to finish routing off this back part. So I decided to go over to the bandsaw and just clean this up a little more, and now I'm going to hit it again with the router bit, which should make it a little bit easier. And there you can see we have the splitter. Exact copy. Before I go and pull this off and use the flush trim bit to knock off that last little edge around here, I am going to drill these 5 holes in here so I know that the holes will line up with this back part and the front will stick out a little bit. So we'll go over to the drill press and get that done. So I forgot to record the last segment, but I did drill the holes while this was still taped on there so they lined up. I went back to the router table and flipped this piece of wood around like this, flush trim cut the edges so you can see we have an exact replica of the splitter, but it sticks out a little further forward, which is exactly what I wanted. I did just hit the edges with some sandpaper, real light, to knock down any burrs or anything. Now I am going to cut a strip of the G10 that's approximately the same length as this, same width, tape the G10 to the piece of wood, and then again repeat the process with the flush trim bit. So I have a G10 splitter. So I am back over at the table saw. Just want to get an idea of the length I need to cut, which should be exactly what I cut this piece of wood for. So I am now going to cut a piece of G10 to that size. This stuff makes a lot of dust, so you do want to be cautious not to breathe any of it in. So now I am going to add some of that double stick tape to this piece of wood. And this doesn't necessarily have to be lined up with any of the edges because we were going to use the flush trim bit to go around and ensure it is the same shape. Once I got that set, I'm going to put some pressure on it. So now that I have the stencil taped to the piece of G10, I am going to cut this extra part off with the miter saw, cut this part off with the bandsaw, this with the miter saw, and then run it around the flush trim bit. And we should have an exact replica. And before I take this piece of wood off, I am going to drill out all the holes using these holes as the guide. So everything should line up. So I did switch over to a older bit that's not as sharp. I know that the G10 is definitely going to dull this bit, so I'm not as worried about it dulling this one as opposed to my nicer Freud bit. So as you can see, we have that lined up with the edge. We're just going to take off that very last bit. And actually, I've never cut G10 on a router table, so I have no idea if this is going to work. So we're all going along for a ride. So that actually cut really nicely. I was pleasantly surprised to see that. The edge is very nice. It's actually smoother than the wood. I may go back with a piece of sandpaper and just knock it down a tiny bit, but I am very happy with that. So let's drill those holes now. So we're over at the drill press again. We still have the number 31 bit in there, and we are just going to drill out these holes. And again, the piece of wood will be our guide. So we got the holes drilled. I did run a sanding block just around the edges to smooth them out a tiny bit. They did look pretty good. There are a couple spots that I may hit again, but overall I'm very happy with it so far. So I am now going to pull it off of the piece of wood. Maybe. There we go. And you can also buy sheets of carbon fiber on Amazon like this, or eBay. It's a little more expensive. Well, it's about double the price, not gonna lie. Does look pretty cool, but there we have it. So I just gave it a wipe down, and that's our finished piece. It should be about 3 millimeters longer in the front than this, so we can compare it. I am not sure what those other holes up front are for, but I was only concerned with matching those 5 up. So if you compare them, you can see it's just a little taller in the front. Everything else lines up, all the holes. Let's put it on and take a look. I'm not really concerned with it getting scratched, given that you're not going to see any of it really, besides the bottom, which is also going to get scratched. She fits. The holes look like they line up. I don't even want to run this and get it all dirty. So I just put the splitter back on, all the holes lined up perfectly, got the screws in. As you can see, this is our stencil that we used, and this is the stock one, which if you line up the back, this will be slightly longer. Stick out the front more, Hopefully it looks good. It'll definitely provide a little more protection. We can see we don't have to worry about the wheels hitting it at all. There we go. That's what it looks like. I think it looks awesome. I am going to go around the edges and just hit them with some higher grit sandpaper just to smooth them out and polish them up a little bit. But overall, very happy with how that turned out. You can see the edge is a little bit lighter than the actual material itself. If you do hit it with a piece of sandpaper, it does darken up quite a bit. But it's gonna get scratched up and banged up anyways. I'm not really concerned about it. But I think that does look awesome. And you can always paint this stuff as well, any color you want. So if you wanted to paint it a nice gloss orange like that, I'm sure you could find some paint to match it. And that would look pretty cool with a little trim of orange down there. That wraps up the build. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. If you want to see how I built these awesome side skirts using a similar method, click the link in the top corner. And as always, thank you for watching, and don't forget to smash that like and subscribe.